That summer by grandmother's harbour cottage, the world seemed to slow its breathing and let us listen. I was a child then, bright with mischief and the stubborn ache of a summer day that would never quite finish. The air carried the salt sea sting of the afternoon, and the faint sweetness of lilac stuck to the edge of the garden. And everything sounded a little softer there. The creak of the porch swing, the gulls combing the wind for something to steal, the steady clink of boats against the dock, as if the harbour itself were yearling and patient, learning to hold its breath for us. Grandmother kept a little kitchen, always smelling faintly of lemon and fish, as if the sea itself came to rest there for a moment every morning. The stove hissed with its own small life, a stubborn, faithful flame that warmed the back of your neck, even as the door stood open to admit a breeze heavy with the scent of seaweed and flower. She wore her apron like a flag of quiet authority, hands softened by years of kneading and weather, eyes that could see through a storm's bravado to the tiny, stubborn truth about a person. She never hurried you. She invited you into the room where meals were made of small attentions, rinsing shells, setting a table with navy blue enamel dishes, and waiting with you for the bread to rise until it sang with warmth. We came each morning with salty hats and hair still damp from the sea, as if we carried the day's weather inside us, and grandmother would call us to the little plastic basin she kept by the sink for washing up after nets and crabs. The rhythm of the morning was a ritual. Scrub hands, rinse, pat dry with a towel that had faded stripes the colour of old sea glass. Lean down to sniff the air, or perhaps to pretend to sniff the air, as if she could smell the hours to come, and say softly, "Listen first, child. The world will tell you its rules if you'll listen long enough." And we listened, because to listen was safe and sweet, and the steady compass of a summer's map. That particular summer's memory scarcely feels dramatic in the telling, and yet it moved a hinge in my heart. It was a day when the harbour wore its light differently, a day when the tide drew back with a deliberate, almost conversational sigh, and revealed a strand of smooth grey pebbles that had not been there a moment before. We had spent the morning helping grandmother mend the old net, knot by stubborn knot, until the net lay in a patient coil at her feet, like a sleeping creature whose memory of wind and sea could still be coaxed into listening. The air tasted faintly of tar and salt, and the soft sweetness of pears from the nearby orchard, and every sound, the clack of shellfish shelves in the market, the distant echo of a boy's laughter, the slap of water against the pilings, seemed to carry a secret message I was only just learning to understand. Near the end of that day, grandmother took my hand and led me to the edge of the small pier that jutted away into the harbour's quiet throat. The wood was warm under our bare feet, and the board's grain printed itself into the soles of my feet, as if to remind me that my body belongs to places and seasons, not just to a single moment. The water looked then like a living blue animal, slow to move and quick to leap if you dared to blink too long. We stood there together, the world a patient year older than I, and the sun leaned low enough to draw a thin line of gold across the surface, turning every ripple into a thread of light. Grandmother spoke without raising her voice, as if she was speaking to a cat perched on a fence, or to the stubborn old boat at the end of the dock that wouldn't start without a careful nudge. "The sea doesn't hurry," she said, "but it never forgets what it's learned. It teaches patience the way a garden teaches a seed its own time to grow." I watched the water keep its old, patient promises, and I felt a strange kinship with that slow, patient world. It was not fear I felt, though there was fear enough, the fear of the unknown, of the deep, of failing to measure up to the day's quiet demands. It was more like a quiet astonishment, a leaning toward trust that felt foreign and wonderfully right at once. Then grandmother laid her hand over mine, a grandmother's gentle weight, and guided my foot into the shallow edge of the sea. The water was cool and clean against my skin, a sting at first that turned to a restfulness, as if the sea were a mother's hand smoothing a fretful child. "Breathe with the tide," she said, and she began to count, not in a loud voice, but in a cadence that felt almost like a song the waves hum when no one is listening. We stepped slowly, the water gliding around our ankles, then our knees, then around my very conscience, until the first fear, like a shallow spark, flickered and died. What followed was not a grand triumph, but a small, almost tender victory. I learned to exhale steadily, to lean back into the water a little and let the sea carry me a breath at a time, with grandmother's hand steady at my shoulder, the rest of the world receding into the distance, where it could hold its own life in its own time. When I closed my eyes, I could hear the sea's old mathematics, its counting of tides, its arithmetic of currents, the way wind shifts the surface into a quiet, shimmering map. When I opened them again, the harbour looked more patient than I remembered, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along, for a child to stop rushing and simply listen to the space between breath and wave. That moment, not grand in spectacle, but immense in what remained after, taught me a way of being. It taught me to inhabit small, careful corners of life with reverence, to watch a kettle rise, to listen for a door that never slams, to notice how a grandmother's hands move in the light. It was in that gentle, almost unremarkable hour that I learned bravery's patient face, not the bravado of a shout, but the steadiness of choosing to begin again, even when fear sits on your chest like a stubborn weight. The sea did exactly what it promised to do. It waited. And if you learned to wait with it, it would teach you your own slow, stubborn way toward shore. I carried that quiet into later years, as if it were a lamp tucked into my coat pocket. There were storms in life, storms of work and worry, of illness and loss, storms that threatened to pull me under with their loud teeth and quick, reckless spray. Yet in the small hours, I could recall the harbour's edge, the taste of salt on my lips, the soft sigh of the water around my knees, grandmother's patient touch, the way the tide turned with a hush rather than a shout. I learned that endurance is often made up of tiny, nearly invisible acts. The way a mother waits for a child to sleep, the way a friend sits in quiet presence, the way a neighbour shares a cup of tea while the world outside rattles and roars. It's as the years did their careful circling of the sun, I found other shores, places where the sea did not sing quite so easily, where the wind carried more grit than grace, where the days stretched long and heavy with work. I did not forget my grandmother's hands, or the way the boat rocked gently while the water kept a patient companionship with shore. I did not forget the exact moment I learned to listen as if listening could save a life, or the way a small child's breathing could become the rhythm by which a man would measure his own courage. The memory became a compass that pointed toward kindness, toward the belief that a life is measured not by the loudness of its deeds, but by the sincerity of its listening, and by the tenderness with which we hold the people near us. In the end, what I carry from that summer is not a single achievement or a dramatic scene, but a softened centre, a way of moving through the world with a quiet, almost private mercy. The harbour still sits at the edge of my memory, A place where the air tastes of lemon and salt, where the nets want